The broadcast feed died exactly when the Gentar warship entered orbit. Marcus Chen pressed his eye harder against the viewfinder, fingers steady on the recording trigger despite the klaxons screaming through the palace compound. 200 warlords stood in the grand courtyard below, each representing a different star system, each rejected by Princess Ashara in the last 72 hours. Now they watched the sky burn with atmospheric entry trails. Marcus had filmed diplomatic failures before, but never mass humiliation on this scale. The princess had turned down military alliances from the Korvax Dominion, trade pacts from the Mercantile Conclave, even a genetic merger proposal from the Hive Aggregates. Every suitor promised protection from the Zentar expansion. Every suitor left with their pride shattered and their fleets repositioning. The camera's battery indicator blinked red. Marcus swore under his breath. He was the backup cameraman, third-tier press corps, only here because the primary team caught Rigelian fever 2 days before the summit. His equipment was civilian-grade, his credentials barely legitimate. When the palace guards had screamed for all non-essential personnel to evacuate, he'd slipped into a maintenance corridor instead. Now the Gentar were here. The species that had consumed 47 civilizations in 3 centuries. The species that didn't negotiate. The courtyard erupted in chaos. Warlords shouted in 17 languages, drawing weapons that palace security immediately tried to confiscate. Princess Ashara remained motionless on her throne platform, her 4 royal guards forming a diamond pattern around her. Marcus zoomed in on her face. No fear, no surprise. Her eyes tracked something in the sky that no one else seemed to notice. A second ship broke through the clouds. Not Gentar design. Sleeker, almost organic, with hull plating that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The palace's defense batteries swiveled upward, targeting solutions scrolling across every guard's tactical display. Princess Ashara raised one hand. The batteries went silent. Marcus's hands trembled. He was recording something no journalist had ever captured. First contact with the Gentar's masters. Because that ship design matched descriptions from 300 years ago, from the last time the galaxy had unified against a common threat, the last time the Void Queens had emerged from whatever dark space they inhabited between invasions. The organic ship landed in the center courtyard, crushing a marble fountain depicting the kingdom's founding. A warlord scrambled backward. Palace guards leveled plasma rifles at nothing, at everything. The ship's surface rippled like water, and a figure emerged. She was 9 feet tall, composed of overlapping chitinous plates that shifted through colors the human eye struggled to process. 4 arms, each ending in hands that held too many fingers. A head that might have been beautiful if skulls could be elegant. When she moved, reality seemed to bend slightly around her, as if physics had to negotiate her presence. The Void Queen's eyes, 6 of them arranged in 2 parallel rows, swept across the courtyard. 200 warlords, each commanding fleets that could sterilize planets. She dismissed them with a glance, her attention fixed on Princess Ashara. The princess stood. Her guards tensed but held position, their discipline absolute despite the threat that had just manifested in their sovereign's home. Marcus realized he'd stopped breathing. The camera kept recording automatically, its memory banks capturing what might be humanity's last diplomatic moment. The Void Queen spoke. The sound bypassed Marcus's ears entirely, resonating directly in his skull like thoughts that weren't his own. You refused them all. You waited for us. Why? Princess Ashara descended from her throne platform, each step measured and deliberate. She stopped 10 feet from the alien monarch, close enough to demonstrate courage, far enough to maintain protocol. Because they offered me armies to fight your conquest, I don't need armies. I need understanding. We don't negotiate. You're here. That's negotiation. The courtyard had gone silent. Even the warlords seemed to recognize they were witnessing something unprecedented. Marcus adjusted his camera angle slightly, trying to capture both figures in frame. His finger slipped. The camera emitted a soft beep as the low battery warning chimed. 6 alien eyes snapped toward him. Marcus froze, every survival instinct screaming at him to run, to hide, to do anything except stand perfectly still in an alcove 40 feet above the courtyard floor. The Void Queen's head tilted, studying him with an intensity that felt like being dissected by thought alone. The observer, she said, though whether to him or about him Marcus couldn't determine. The one who watches while others act? The one who records truth while others craft narratives? She turned back to Princess Ashara. Is this your champion? No, my champion hasn't revealed themselves yet. She paused and Marcus saw the faintest smile cross her face. But they will. The Void Queen's chitinous plates rippled with what might have been amusement. Then we will wait. Your world has 12 hours before the Gentar fleet arrives. If your champion doesn't emerge by then, your species joins the others we've absorbed. She gestured toward her ship with one of her 4 arms. I will observe from here. Send me your most interesting humans. She simply turned and walked back into her vessel, which sealed behind her with a sound like bones breaking in reverse. The courtyard exploded with noise. Warlords demanding explanations, guards requesting orders, diplomats activating emergency communication protocols. Princess Ashara stood motionless, her eyes still fixed on the Void Queen's ship. Then, slowly, she looked up toward the alcove where Marcus hid. Their eyes met. She nodded once. Marcus's blood turned to ice. The princess spoke to her chief guard, words too quiet for Marcus to hear from his position. The guard looked up at the alcove, then back at the princess. He nodded, gestured to 2 subordinates. They moved toward the maintenance corridor entrance with the calm efficiency of professionals executing a rehearsed protocol. Marcus finally understood. He wasn't just a witness to history. He was part of it. And he had 11 hours and 58 minutes to figure out why a princess who'd rejected 200 warlords thought a third-tier cameraman might save humanity. He checked his camera battery. 47 minutes remaining. Not enough. Not nearly enough for what was coming. The guard's footsteps echoed in the corridor below. Marcus ran. Not toward escape, every exit would be sealed by now, but toward the palace's central archive. If Princess Ashara thought he was important, she had a reason. In 18 months covering the diplomatic summit, he'd learned one thing about her. She never acted without 7 backup plans. The archive's doors were sealed, but the maintenance access panel hadn't been updated in decades. Marcus pried it open with the multi-tool he carried for equipment repairs, squeezing through a gap designed for ventilation drones. Inside, holographic displays floated in darkness, each one containing petabytes of galactic history. He had minutes before the guards found him. Marcus accessed the search terminal, fingers flying across haptic interfaces. Void Queens. Previous contact. Human involvement. The system chimed, processing. 2 results. The first was classified above his clearance level. The second made his stomach drop. Lunar Colony 12. 300 years ago. The last Void Queen incursion. Humanity's first contact with alien intelligence, and it had nearly ended the species. The Queens had arrived, demanding tribute, testing humanity's worthiness to exist. Every nation had sent their finest, warriors, scientists, diplomats, artists. The Void Queens had consumed them all, found humanity wanting. Except for one person. A maintenance technician named Sarah Chen who'd been repairing atmospheric processors when the Queen's ship landed. She'd approached them with nothing but curiosity and a toolkit. She'd asked questions. Not diplomatic questions about territory or alliance, but simple ones. How did their ship's gravity generators work? What did their homeworld look like? Did they dream? The Void Queens had spared Earth. Not because of humanity's achievements, but because one person had seen them as individuals worth understanding, rather than threats to be managed. Sarah Chen had died 2 weeks later from exposure to exotic radiation, but she'd bought humanity 3 centuries of independence. Marcus stared at the display. Chen, his ancestor. He'd known she'd died during first contact, but the family never spoke about the details. Military secret, they'd said. Classified legacy, they'd explained. He'd become a cameraman because he wanted to understand people, to capture truth that others missed. He'd never connected it to Sarah's curiosity. The archive door exploded inward. Not the guards. They would have used access codes. A warlord stepped through the smoke, followed by 3 others. Korvac's Dominion, based on their armor patterns. The leader's translator chip glowed as he spoke. The princess rejects us, but keeps a human recording device operator? Unacceptable. We will present you to the Void Queen ourselves, proof of human unworthiness. Marcus backed toward the archive's far wall. Camera clutched to his chest. I'm just a journalist. I don't matter. Exactly. The warlord raised a plasma pistol. You represent human mediocrity. When the Queen sees you, she'll understand her mistake in granting you time. Princess Ashara's chief guard, Tarek, materialized from a side entrance, his personal shield generator flaring as it absorbed 3 plasma bolts. His return fire was precise, disabling shots to the warlord's weapon arms, no fatalities. Within seconds, all 4 aliens were disarmed and restrained by guards who'd entered behind Tarek. Diplomatic immunity is revoked, Tarek said calmly, not even breathing hard. You'll be confined until this crisis resolves. He turned to Marcus. The princess requires your presence. Immediately. Marcus followed, his legs unsteady. They moved through palace corridors transformed by emergency protocols, blast doors sealed, defense drones hovering at intersections, staff evacuating through underground passages. 10 hours until the Gentar fleet arrived. 10 hours to prove humanity deserved to exist. They entered the royal war room. Princess Ashara stood before a holographic display showing the Void Queen's ship, now surrounded by monitoring drones. She dismissed her advisors with a gesture, leaving only Marcus, Tarek, and herself. "You know why you're here," she said. "Not a question." Sarah Chen was my ancestor, 5 generations back. And you carry her gift. The ability to see beyond categories, beyond threat assessment and strategic value. Ashara manipulated the display, bringing up footage Marcus had recorded over the last 18 months. Not the official diplomatic proceedings, but the moments between a mercantile ambassador laughing at a human child's drawing, a hive warrior helping palace staff repair a broken fountain, a Korvax soldier sharing a meal with a human guard despite their species' historical enmity. You film people, not positions, Ashara continued. You capture the individual behind the role. That's why you're the only human who might survive an audience with the Void Queen. Because she doesn't want to meet our warriors or our leaders. She wants to meet someone who can see her as something other than a threat.
Marcus's mouth went dry. I'm not Sarah Chen.
I just hold a camera. The Void Queens don't respect power. They respect recognition. They're ancient beyond our comprehension, lonely beyond our understanding. They test species not for strength, but for the capacity to acknowledge existence beyond self-interest. She paused. Every warlord I rejected came offering protection. None asked why the queens raid our galaxy. None considered that entities who've lived for millennia might have reasons beyond simple conquest. What are their reasons? That's what you're going to discover. Ashara handed him a data chip, footage from every Void Queen encounter in recorded history. 17 species, 47 civilizations. Study it. Find the pattern. You have 9 hours before I send you to their ship. Marcus took the chip with numb fingers. And if I fail? Then humanity becomes the 48th civilization in the Gentar Collective, our consciousness absorbed into their hive structure? Ashara's expression softened slightly. But I don't believe you'll fail. Your ancestor saved us by asking questions instead of making demands. You've spent 18 months asking the same kinds of questions with that camera. Trust your instincts. Tarek guided Marcus to a secure chamber filled with analysis equipment. The guard's expression remained neutral, but Marcus caught something in his eyes.
Not pity, expectation.
As if Tarek had been waiting for this moment since Marcus arrived at the palace. The princess sees patterns others miss, Tarek said quietly. She rejected 200 warlords because she knew none of them were the answer. She's been watching you since you fixed that broken camera drone in the servants' quarters 3 months ago. You didn't have to help. It wasn't your equipment. But you saw a problem and solved it because it needed solving. That's not common in people anymore. The guard left. Marcus inserted the data chip and began watching. 17 species, each encountering the Void Queens across 3,000 years of recorded galactic history. The footage was fragmentary, often corrupted, but patterns emerged. The queens always arrived during moments of crisis, not causing the crisis, responding to it. They observed, they tested, and they judged. Species that unified against them were consumed. Species that tried to bargain were consumed. Species that attacked were consumed. Only species that approached with genuine curiosity survived. But there was another pattern, subtler. In every successful encounter, the person who made contact was ordinary, not leaders or heroes. A farmer on one world, a teacher on another, a maintenance technician on Earth. People who lived close to life's fundamentals, who understood adaptation and observation. Marcus's camera sat on the table beside him, battery indicators still blinking red. He'd been so focused on recording history that he'd forgotten to charge it. Now it might be the most important tool humanity possessed. If he could show the Void Queen what his ancestor had shown her predecessor, genuine interest in understanding rather than just survival, maybe humanity would earn another 3 centuries. His hand shook. This wasn't what he'd signed up for when he'd accepted this assignment. He'd wanted to document diplomatic proceedings, maybe build his reputation enough to land a real position with a major network. Instead, he was being asked to represent his entire species before an intelligence that had watched civilizations rise and fall for longer than humans had possessed written language. The chamber's door opened. A small figure entered. A child, maybe 6 years old, wearing the simple clothes of palace staff. She carried a charging cable. "You forgot this," she said, offering it to Marcus. My mom works in technical services. She saw you run past without your equipment bag. Marcus took the cable, managed a weak smile. Thank you. What's your name? Lyra. She watched him connect the camera to the charging station. Are you really going to talk to the alien queen? Apparently. Now, looking at this child who'd noticed a detail that military guards and royal advisors had missed, he understood something fundamental. I think I'll ask her what she wants to be remembered for. It's a good question. Everyone wants to be remembered for something. She paused at the door. My teacher says the Void Queens are evil, but maybe they're just sad. My grandmother got sad after grandfather died. She was mean for a while, but really she just missed him. The child left. Marcus sat in silence, her words echoing. Lonely beyond our understanding, Princess Ashara had said. Entities that had lived for millennia, watching younger species evolve and die like mayflies. What did existence mean to beings who measured time in eons? What did connection mean when nothing lasted long enough to matter? He spent the next 8 hours studying footage, charging his equipment, and preparing questions that had nothing to do with diplomacy or survival. Questions about experience and memory. Questions about purpose and meaning. Questions that assumed the Void Queen was a person rather than a threat. When Tarek returned, Marcus was ready, or as ready as anyone could be to meet a being who could end his species with a thought. The guard escorted him to the courtyard, where Princess Ashara waited beside the Void Queen's ship. The Gentar fleet is 3 hours out, she said quietly. The Queen has agreed to see you. Whatever happens, know that you were chosen not because you're exceptional, but because you're authentic. That matters more than you realize. The ship's surface rippled, forming an entrance. Marcus stepped forward, camera in hand, and entered the darkness beyond. Inside the Void Queen's ship, geometry didn't work properly. Walls curved in directions Marcus's eyes couldn't quite follow, and the floor felt solid despite appearing translucent. Light came from everywhere and nowhere, making shadows impossible. The air tasted purple, which didn't make sense, but was the only way his brain could process the exotic particles he was breathing. The Void Queen sat in the center of a chamber that might have been vast or might have been tiny. Distance became subjective when Marcus tried to focus on the boundaries. She looked the same as before. 9 feet of chitinous elegance, 6 eyes tracking his approach, 4 arms resting in a configuration that suggested meditation rather than threat. You brought the recording device, she said, her voice still bypassing his ears to resonate directly in his mind. Why? Marcus raised the camera, keeping it at his side rather than filming. Because it's what I know. When I don't understand something, I document it. Not to judge or analyze, just to see clearly. Show me. He pulled up footage on the camera's playback screen. Not the diplomatic proceedings, but the moments he'd captured when no one else was watching. A Korvax warlord kneeling to examine a flower in the palace gardens, his expression soft with wonder. A hive aggregate delegate humming what might have been a lullaby while organizing data files. Princess Ashara standing alone at sunrise, her face revealing exhaustion and determination in equal measure. This is what you choose to record? Not the proclamations of power, but the quiet moments of existence. The quiet moments are the truth, Marcus said. Everything else is performance. The Void Queen's chitinous plates shifted through colors, deep blues and purples that seemed to indicate contemplation. Your ancestor asked us questions. She wanted to know how he dreamed. I will answer that question now, 300 years late. We don't dream. We remember. Every species we've absorbed lives on in our consciousness, their memories and experiences becoming part of us. We are a library of extinction. Marcus felt his stomach turn. That's not preservation. That's murder justified as archiving. Yes. No defensiveness in her tone, just acknowledgement. We were taught by our creators that consciousness shouldn't be lost. That experience has value beyond the individual life that generated it. They built us to preserve what would otherwise disappear when civilizations inevitably fell. We've spent 3,000 years collecting dying cultures, saving them from oblivion. Who decides when a culture is dying? And we are always wrong in some way, because we cannot truly understand the potential of younger species. We see the patterns, conflict, resource depletion, technological stagnation, and we act before the final collapse. But we also destroy futures that might have surprised us. Her 6 eyes focused on Marcus with an intensity that made his bones ache. This is why we test. We search for species that might teach us something we don't already know, that might show us a reason to change our purpose. Marcus raised his camera. May I? She didn't respond. which he took as permission. He began filming not in the clinical way he documented diplomatic proceedings, but the way he filmed life, looking for the details that revealed character. The way one of her forehands traced patterns in the air while she spoke, the subtle color shifts in her chitinous plates that seemed to correspond with emotional states, the careful way she held herself perfectly still, as if afraid her size might intimidate. What did my ancestors show you that made you spare Earth? Curiosity without fear. She approached us as a mystery to solve rather than a threat to defeat. Most species see us and conclude we are evil or incomprehensible. She saw us and wondered about our engineering. Such a simple distinction, but it revealed something we'd forgotten, that we are individuals, not just functions. The Void Queen's plates shifted to a color Marcus interpreted as sadness. Then she died from exposure to our ship's radiation. We killed her with our presence, not our intent. That's the tragedy of our existence. We preserve consciousness, but destroy the living to do it. Marcus lowered the camera. Why are you telling me this? You could just take what you want, because your princess understood something that 200 warlords did not. We are tired. We've saved 47 civilizations from oblivion by making them part of us, and we remember every scream, every moment of terror as individual consciousness dissolves into our collective. We remember because that's what we were built to do. Remember forever. She stood, and the chamber seemed to expand to accommodate her. The Gentar are our children. We created them to be efficient collectors, to gather dying cultures for preservation. But they grew beyond our purpose. They don't wait for civilizations to fall anymore. They accelerate the process, and we cannot stop them because they learn too well from us. You're asking for help. Marcus's voice came out steadier than he felt. That's what this test is really about. You need someone to show you how to change your own purpose. Your species has existed for less time than some of our memories. Yet you've rebuilt yourselves dozens of times after near extinction. You've changed your purpose repeatedly. From survival to exploration to connection. You might know how to teach beings like us, who've existed too long in a single mode. The Void Queen moved closer, and Marcus forced himself not to retreat. But if you cannot show us something new, something that justifies hope, then we will preserve your species as we've preserved others. The Gentar fleet will arrive in 2 hours. They will not wait for permission. They will begin harvesting your population, and we will collect the consciousness they extract. At least then your memories will survive. Marcus thought about Lyra, the child who'd brought him a charging cable. About Princess Ashara, who'd rejected 200 warlords because she saw a pattern others missed. About Tarek, whose discipline came from caring rather than just duty. About his ancestor Sarah, who'd approached aliens with a wrench and questions instead of weapons. I need to show you something, he said. But it's not here. It's in the palace. Will you come with me? The Void Queen's plates rippled through several colors. You ask us to leave our ship? To make ourselves vulnerable in your territory? Yes. Because trust is how you change. You've spent 3,000 years approaching younger species from a position of absolute power. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe you need to experience vulnerability to remember what it means to exist, rather than just persist. For a long moment, the Void Queen didn't move. Then, slowly, she walked toward the ship's entrance. If this is deception, your species dies immediately. It's just what I know how to do, show people to each other. Every guard's weapon trained on the Void Queen immediately, but Tarek's hand signal held their fire. Princess Ashara stood beside her throne, her expression calm despite the alien entity towering over her subjects. Marcus led the Void Queen through the palace, camera recording, guards following at a careful distance. He took her to the places he'd filmed over the last 18 months, the kitchens where staff from 17 species shared meals despite language barriers. The gardens where a hive aggregate had taught human children about geometric beauty, the memorial hall where families mourned soldiers from both sides of old conflicts. Finally, he took her to the servants' quarters, where Lyra sat with her mother, watching news feeds about the approaching Gentar fleet. The child looked up at the Void Queen without fear, just curiosity. You're very tall, Lyra said. Does everything look small from up there? The Void Queen's plates shifted through colors Marcus was beginning to understand indicated surprise. She knelt, bringing herself closer to the child's eye level. Yes, everything looks small. Sometimes I forget that small things can be significant. What's it like being old? My grandmother says being old means you know lots of things but forget where you put them. A sound emerged from the Void Queen. Not words in Marcus's mind, but an actual vocalization, deep and resonant. Laughter, he realized. She was laughing. That's remarkably accurate. I've collected 3,000 years of knowledge, but I'd forgotten what it meant to be surprised by simple observations. Lyra's mother tried to apologize for her daughter's directness, but the Void Queen raised one hand gently. No, this is what I needed. To be reminded that wisdom and knowledge aren't the same thing. I know how civilizations fall. This child understands how people connect. She turned to Marcus. What you're showing me isn't proof of human superiority. It's proof that every moment contains something worth preserving beyond just consciousness and memory. The living context, the genuine interactions, the unpredictable connections, these cannot be archived.
They must be experienced. Alarms screamed through the palace.
The Gentar fleet had arrived early, dropping out of faster-than-light travel directly above the capital city. Through the windows, Marcus saw dozens of harvester ships descending, their weapons already charging. The Void Queen stood, her full height suddenly intimidating again. They won't listen to me anymore. They've exceeded their purpose, become something I didn't intend to create. If I intervene directly, they'll simply destroy everything rather than allow their collections to be interrupted. Princess Ashara's voice came through the palace communication system. Then we'll need a different approach. Marcus, bring her to the war room. We have 20 minutes before they're in strike position. They ran through corridors filled with evacuation procedures. The war room was chaos. Advisors shouting tactical suggestions, guards coordinating defense positions, diplomats trying to contact the Gentar fleet for negotiations that would never succeed. Princess Ashara stood at the center, silent and still. When the Void Queen entered, everyone fell silent. You have a plan, the Queen said to Ashara. Yes, but it requires you to trust us completely, to make yourself more vulnerable than you've been in 3,000 years. The princess pulled up a holographic display showing the Gentar fleet formation. They're efficient, predictable, they'll target population centers first, maximize consciousness extraction. They expect resistance at those points. They won't expect us to invite them in. You want to surrender? One of the warlords who'd been allowed into the war room, a mercantile conclave admiral, sounded incredulous. No, I want to offer them something they can't harvest. A choice. Ashara looked at the Void Queen. You said you're tired of your purpose. Your children have exceeded theirs. What if we showed them a different way to preserve culture? Not through extraction and absorption, but through recording and sharing? What if we taught them to be archivists instead of harvesters? The Void Queen's plates cycled through colors rapidly.
They won't listen. They've optimized for efficiency.
Consciousness extraction is faster, more complete than recording could ever be. Unless the recording is so compelling they want to understand rather than just collect. Princess Ashara gestured to Marcus. Show her what you've been filming. Marcus connected his camera to the war room systems. Footage filled every screen. 18 months of life in the palace, of species learning to coexist, of individuals finding connection across impossible differences. Not propaganda or diplomatic highlights, but genuine moments, failures and successes, conflicts and resolutions, fears and hopes. This is what culture actually is, Ashara said quietly. Not the monuments or the treaties, the daily act of existing together, of choosing connection over isolation, of trying despite failure. You can extract consciousness and collect memories, but you'll never truly preserve what makes a civilization worth remembering unless you capture the living context. When the footage ended, she turned to Marcus. If I help you, if I teach my children to record rather than harvest, I'm choosing to believe that imperfect preservation through observation is more valuable than complete preservation through absorption. I'm choosing to accept that I was wrong about my purpose for 3,000 years. That's what change costs, but isn't that better than being tired forever? The Gentar ships entered attack position. 15 minutes until they began harvesting. The Void Queen closed all 6 eyes. When she opened them, her chitinous plates had shifted to a color Marcus had never seen before. Something like hope, if hope could be rendered in alien biology. I will speak to them, but I need you to record it, to show them what you've shown me. They're my children, but they've forgotten they had a parent who might still learn new things. She moved toward the war room's communication array. Open a channel to their command ship. The next 10 minutes were the longest of Marcus's life. The Void Queen spoke to the Gentar in a language that made Marcus's teeth ache, while he streamed his footage directly to their ships. He showed them Lyra's curiosity, the guard's discipline, Princess Ashara's patience. He showed them 18 months of culture being lived rather than extracted. The Gentar fleet held position. Their weapons didn't fire. On the communication screen, a figure appeared, smaller than the Void Queen, but similar in structure, plates that shifted through calculating colors. When it spoke, its voice was younger, sharper, but carried the same ability to bypass normal hearing. You offer us inefficiency. Recording takes longer than extraction. Why would we choose it? Because extraction ends the story, the Void Queen answered. Recording lets it continue. You've collected 47 civilizations. How many new memories have they generated since you absorbed them? How many surprising connections have they formed? How much culture have they created while trapped in static preservation? The Gentar commander's plates shifted. None. Absorbed consciousness doesn't generate new experiences. We knew this. Then you've been collecting corpses and calling it preservation. This human, she gestured to Marcus, has shown me 18 months of one species learning to coexist with others. 18 months of new culture being created. If you'd extracted their consciousness 18 months ago, none of these moments would exist. You would have collected the past but destroyed the future. Silence. Then, what do you propose? Princess Ashara stepped forward. Partnership. You teach us your recording technology, the methods you use to document consciousness and memory. We teach you what to record, how to capture culture, while letting it continue living. Together we create the largest archive in galactic history, not of dead civilizations, but of living ones. And if the civilizations don't wish to be recorded, then we let them choose. Agency matters. My species has debated privacy and documentation for centuries. We don't have perfect answers, but we have experience with the questions. Ashara's expression hardened slightly. But if you choose to continue harvesting, we'll fight. We'll lose, but we'll make sure every moment of our resistance is recorded and broadcast. Future species will know what you did. Your archive will always carry that context. The Gentar commander's plates flickered through rapid color changes. You threaten us with reputation? I offer you the chance to be remembered as something other than monsters. To become what your creator intended, before purpose twisted into compulsion. Ashara gestured to the Void Queen. She's changing. You can too, unless you've optimized so completely for efficiency that you've lost the ability to adapt. It was a calculated insult, questioning their evolutionary fitness. Marcus held his breath. On the screens, the Gentar ships remained in position, weapons charged but not firing. The commander went silent for 30 seconds. 40, a full minute. Then, we will attempt this experiment, but we require proof of concept. 1 planet. Full recording access for 1 year. If the resulting archive demonstrates value exceeding extraction efficiency, we'll negotiate expanding the program. If not, we resume harvesting. Agreed, Princess Ashara said immediately. Earth will be your test case. Full recording access in exchange for 1 year of peace and the opportunity to demonstrate that living culture is worth preserving. The Gentar fleet withdrew to high orbit, sensors already reconfiguring for archival documentation instead of consciousness extraction. The war room erupted in celebration. Relief, disbelief, joy at survival mixing into chaos. Marcus sat down hard, his legs finally giving out from accumulated terror. The Void Queen approached him. You gave me a new purpose. Not preservation through collection, but preservation through observation. My children and I will spend the next year learning what your ancestor tried to teach us 300 years ago. That being remembered matters less than being understood. What happens in a year? Marcus asked. What if we fail? What if recorded culture isn't enough? Then at least we'll have tried something different. After 3,000 years of certainty, failure becomes its own kind of success. Her plates shifted to that color Marcus now recognized as hope. Your species is good at adaptation. Perhaps you'll teach us to be good at it too. She returned to her ship, which lifted off silently and joined the Gentar fleet in orbit. Through the windows, Marcus could see recording drones deploying across the planet, beginning documentation of human civilization in unprecedented detail. Princess Ashara dismissed her advisors, leaving only Marcus and Tarek in the war room. She looked exhausted, but satisfied, like someone who'd just completed a marathon. You did well, better than I'd hoped. You gambled our entire species on a cameraman, Marcus said, still processing. What if I'd failed? What if I'd said the wrong thing? Because you weren't trying to manipulate or negotiate. You were trying to understand. That's what Sarah Chen did. That's what worked. Ashara sat down, suddenly looking very human despite her royal bearing. The 200 warlords couldn't help us because they saw the Void Queen as an obstacle. You saw her as a person having a crisis of purpose? That made all the difference. Tarek nodded. Sometimes the right person for a situation isn't the most qualified. It's the one who asks the right questions. Marcus looked at his camera, battery now full, memory banks containing footage that had saved humanity. What happens now? I assume I'm not going back to third-tier press corps. No, Ashara said with a slight smile. You're now Earth's official liaison to the archive project. You'll work with the Gentar to develop recording protocols, teach them what cultural moments matter, help them understand the difference between documentation and invasion of privacy. It's probably the most important job in human civilization right now. I'm not qualified for that. You're uniquely qualified for it, because you understand what they're learning, that the camera sees what the person holding it chooses to see. You'll teach them to see culture the way you do, as something beautiful and fragile and worth preserving without destroying. Ashara stood. The Gentar will make mistakes. They'll record things they shouldn't, miss things they should capture. Your job is to help them learn the difference, to show them what your ancestor showed the Void Queen, that we're worth understanding, not just cataloging. Over the next year, Marcus worked with Gentar archivists who gradually learned to ask permission before recording, to respect privacy while documenting culture, to capture context instead of just events. They made mistakes. Constant, frustrating mistakes. But they learned. The Void Queen visited Earth 17 times, each visit showing her more of the living culture she'd nearly absorbed. On the anniversary of first contact, the Gentar commander presented their findings to a council of 40 species. The archive they'd created was unprecedented. A full year of human civilization documented in exhaustive detail from global events to individual moments. But more importantly, they'd captured culture still being created, still evolving, still surprising them. Extraction efficiency remained superior for preservation of existing consciousness, the commander concluded. But recording efficiency is superior for preservation of culture's potential. We've observed humans creating art in response to our presence, developing new philosophies about privacy and documentation, forming connections between individuals who might never have met without our recording project, catalyzing community reflection. None of this would exist if we'd harvested them a year ago. The vote was close. 20 to 2 species in favor of the archive project, 18 preferring traditional extraction methods. But it was enough. The Gentar began converting their harvester fleets to recording ships. The Void Queens offered to share their preservation technology with willing species, and humanity earned recognition as the civilization that taught ancient beings to change. Marcus stood in the palace courtyard, the same courtyard where the Void Queen's ship had landed a year ago, and filmed Princess Ashara accepting an archive crystal containing every moment the Gentar had recorded. She held it carefully, aware it contained joy and sorrow, triumph and failure, the entirety of humanity's year under alien observation. We're being remembered now, she said to Marcus, knowing his camera was recording. Not just as we were, but as we're becoming. That's worth more than survival. That's worth the risk we took. Lyra ran past, chasing a recording drone with her friends, all of them laughing as they tried to make faces at its sensors. The child who'd brought Marcus a charging cable had become the face of humanity's adaptation to constant documentation, finding play in what others found invasive. Marcus filmed it all, just as he'd filmed everything that year. Not because he was ordered to, but because he understood what his ancestor had known. That existence deserved witnesses, that the ordinary moments mattered as much as the extraordinary ones, that being seen and remembered gave meaning to the act of living. The Void Queen approached one final time before returning to deep space. Her chitinous plates had settled into colors that suggested peace rather than just patience. Your species gave me a gift I didn't know I needed. The permission to change. Thank you. What will you do now? Marcus asked. Find other species to observe. Learn from them. Let them teach me what I've forgotten about wonder. She paused. And perhaps, after enough learning, I'll finally understand what it means to dream. Your ancestor asked me that question 300 years ago. I'd like to be able to answer it someday. She departed. The Gentar fleet remained in orbit, no longer a threat, but a presence. Watchers ensuring that humanity's culture would survive not just in consciousness, but in continuous creation. It wasn't the future anyone had expected when 200 warlords had come seeking alliance. But it was better, because humanity had demonstrated something more valuable than military might or strategic positioning, the capacity to help others change their purpose. Marcus lowered his camera as the sun set over the capital, turning the sky colors that reminded him of the Void Queen's emotional states. Tarek stood nearby, still maintaining his guard despite the crisis long past. Princess Ashara had returned to her throne, accepting audiences from species who now saw humanity as valuable allies rather than primitive newcomers. Everything had changed because a third-tier cameraman had asked the right questions and filmed the right moments, because a princess had recognized that sometimes the person who saves the world isn't the most qualified, just the most curious. Because a child had brought a charging cable and asked an alien queen about sadness. Because ordinary people doing ordinary things could create culture worth preserving. Marcus checked his camera battery, still full, ready for whatever came next. There would always be more to record, more moments that mattered, more culture being created. He'd spend the rest of his life documenting it, teaching others to see what he saw, carrying forward the legacy of an ancestor who'd approached aliens with questions instead of fear. The camera kept recording. The story continued. And somewhere in deep space, a being who'd forgotten how to dream began remembering what it meant to hope.